I'm so nervous. I have spoke several times, and I'm always nervous, but it's like today I feel like my heart's about to come out my chest. I think when you guys have me speak, you should just introduce me as the crying speaker or something like that. I always think about how in the Bible, the disciples had different names, and I think I would have been Jessica the crier. But anyway, I'm going to try to get through this. Just bear with me. So the scripture we're using for the Seasons of Change series is Ecclesiastes 3:1. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. So like I said, it was hard for me to even know where to begin preparing for this. And I think it's going to be a bit harder for me to get through it so that you guys can understand what I'm saying. And so it was Friday, October 14th. I went to Billings for a routine hernia surgery. The doctor said it would take about half an hour. We're just going to put a piece of mesh in. You'll be in and out. You'll be fine. Since I already had a previous surgery for a different hernia and to get my gallbladder out, I was thinking, well, if I did both of those and I was fine and this one's just a hernia, I got this. They took me back to the operating room. I know. Maybe I need to. And, with surgeries, they, tell you you're going to get really sleepy and, next thing you know, you're waking up in recovery. So I woke up in recovery. They told me everything went well, that they were going to go get Justin, and I was feeling pretty good overall. I felt like I'd been kicked in the stomach, but that, was a normal feeling. So Justin and I stopped on the way home and got lunch to go, and I took it easy that day, and decided to go to bed early that night. I was just tired and wiped. So I said goodnight to Justin and propped up a bunch of pillows behind me because I couldn't lay flat. And I closed my eyes. I wasn't thinking anything of it. It's just another normal night, going to sleep. Well, a few hours later, I woke up in the most excruciating pain I've ever been in my life, especially in my left side. And I could see that my stomach was really swollen, and I was just thinking, what's going on? I was in so much pain, and I don't know if this ever happened to you, where you're in so much pain you can't get your voice high enough to really say anything. So I was calling out for Justin, thinking I was yelling, and it was coming out more like a whisper. And, the 10, 15 minutes I was in there felt like an eternity. But I finally, I was thinking, because the pain was on my left side, and I needed to roll on my left side to get out of bed. So I was kind of stuck, too. So I was thinking, Lord, what do I do to get someone in here to help me? And so I just decided I'm going to roll over on my right side and yell as loud as I can. So that's what I did. And moments later, Justin burst through the door. And I was just shaking, and my teeth were chattering, and I couldn't control my body. And he said, "Do you want me to call 911? And I said, "No." I don't know why he said no, but he just grabbed my phone and called anyway. So the ambulance came really fast. And I'm really grateful to the paramedics that showed up, because they helped me feel really calm and and safe. I could barely walk because of the pain, and I was freezing. If anybody knows me well, I am never cold. I am very hot-blooded, and Justin put my robe on me. He put 3 blankets over me. The paramedics put 2 more blankets on me that they had, and I was just shaking uncontrollably, just freezing. They told me I was going into shock. My heart rate was at 180 or higher. My blood pressure was falling extremely fast. I don't remember a lot of what happened at PMC. I was in and out of it a lot. I remember I was counting, like after the 15th time that they were trying to get the needle in my vein, I guess they said it kept rolling. I was just over it. I never wanted to see another needle again. And I must have passed out because Justin told me they poked me probably about 25 times just at the PMC. And he told me that I needed to share this story, and I don't remember it, but he said it was really funny, that when I was in the emergency room, the doctor came over and asked me, they probably asked me this 1,000 times while I was in the hospital, but they say, what is your pain on a level from 1 to 10? And I said, 5. And Justin said everybody just kind of stopped what they were doing and stared at me really weird because I'm screaming and crying and, I don't even remember this, but I probably should have said 10. So after seeing them trying to get the needle in my vein, I don't remember anything else that happened there. I don't remember them taking me to Billings. But I guess I needed more help than they could give, so they decided to transfer me to Billings. Next thing I knew, I was sitting in a room at St. Vincent's. My stomach was so swollen, it looked like I was 9 months pregnant. And I'm just thinking, what's wrong with me? There was a couple nurses in the room, and they weren't the nicest people I've ever met. But they told me they needed to stick a tube through my nose to my stomach, and the first attempt didn't work, so they pulled it out and had to do it again. And the second attempt, I remember just feeling a lot of blood, and I passed out. Justin said during that time the doctor told him that I was going to need to have surgery again because they needed to make sure that I didn't have a perforated bowel or anything like that, and that he had literally minutes to make the decision if I should have surgery again. He also told him that had I got here any later than I did, that I probably wouldn't have made it. I faintly remember, I don't remember seeing anything, but I heard someone tell me, you're going back into surgery. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to die. When I was in surgery, they told Justin to go wait in the waiting room. So he went to the closest room he could find to the operating room. 3 hours later, he still hadn't heard anything, so he was obviously very worried. And so he decided to go find the doctor. And he ended up finding me instead laying in ICU. He said I was about double my size, and he could barely recognize me. He saw a nurse and asked her if I was going to make it. She told him that I would probably make it through the night, but that more than likely I probably wouldn't make it through the morning. And if somehow if I did, I may be on a ventilator indefinitely. Now, that nurse ended up she shouldn't have said what she said, and there was a chance I could die, but it wasn't. That's kind of where our frustration started at the hospital because she didn't have the authority to say what she said, and it kind of got everybody confused on what was going on. But the next thing I remember was waking up in ICU. I had tubes down my nose, and the ventilator was down my throat. I remember being so glad to see Justin, and then I saw my mom, and I remember thinking, am I dreaming? Like, why is my mom here? But mostly I remember that although I couldn't remember a lot of what had happened in the past day or so, that God was there in that room with me, and that He spared my life. We still didn't know why all of this had happened and why my body had decided to start attacking itself. The doctor came in at one point, and he just looked at me and he was shaking his head and he said, "Man, you're a mystery, girl." And after that, I think is when it got really hard because I was becoming more awake, more aware of what was going on, and the reality of everything just started to hit me. I couldn't speak to anyone because I had the ventilator in my mouth. And then they also had my hands tied down because they didn't want me to pull the ventilator out. So Justin and my mom were trying to very gently explain to me kind of what had happened. And they told me that I stopped breathing during surgery, so that's why they had to put the ventilator in. Then when we got out of surgery, they tried taking it out, and I stopped breathing again, so they had to put it back in. They told me that my incision was pretty large, and they had to stitch me up and also staple my stomach as well. I remember feeling like a balloon because I was just so swollen. My mouth and tongue were so dry, and all I could think about was, I want a glass of water. I couldn't tell anybody. But my mind was just spinning with questions that I couldn't ask. And all I could do was pray in my mind for peace. And that's exactly what God gave me. In Isaiah 26:3, it says, "You will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, all whose thoughts are fixed on you." And at that time, that's the only place my thoughts could be, was on Him. While I laid in my hospital bed, my spirits were so lifted, knowing that my mom could come out to be with me, although I know it probably had to cost her an arm and a leg since it was a last-minute flight. And my dad wasn't originally going to be able to come because they had just recently purchased tickets for me and Justin and Connor and Logan to go spend an early Christmas with them in Virginia. Well, a friend from my church in Virginia contacted my dad and had heard what was going on and said, "I want to give my flyer miles to you so that you can go be there with her." And that was such a blessing. I was told that my brother-in-law, Shane, and Jacob and Courtney had all gone and spent time with Justin, so he wouldn't have to be alone. I knew my kids were in good hands. And most importantly, I was alive. As I laid there, since I couldn't talk, Justin would just read me message after message after message of love and support from you guys and other friends and family. And I can't tell you all the strength that gave me. He told me how many people had been praying. I know without a shadow of a doubt that the prayers that went up from this church and from all over the world really is why I'm standing here today. There were 2 times in the ICU where it looked like I was starting to get bad again. And both times, Justin sent out requests, just filling everybody in on what was happening. And it was almost like immediately I would start to get better. And without explanation, it was just, we'd ask people to pray about something that was happening with me, and then, moments later, it's going up again, and God answers prayer, So after having the ventilator in for a couple of days, I was more than ready to have it come out, but they didn't want to risk taking it out a third time, only to have to put it back in because they had already, the second time they put it in, they had stuck it in too far, and putting it in the third time, they said they just couldn't do it. So they just wanted to wait. I think they could see just how frustrated I was getting, not being able to communicate with anybody. That I remember when my hands were tied down, my mom and Justin could never understand what I was doing, but I kept kind of tipping my hand, just trying to tell them, because every once in a while they would come wet my tongue because it would get so dry. And so I would try to motion them water, water, and they guessed everything under the sun but that. So they untied my hands, and as long as I promised not to touch the ventilator. And it was a relief to me because at least now I can actually point, and I motioned to them that I wanted something to write with. I was kind of out of it from being, they had me sedated. And I don't know how, they showed me the little book that I was writing in. And I don't remember writing a lot of what I wrote or how they read the chicken scratch that I wrote in there. But I told them that they would come in every once in a while and clear my ventilator out, and when they would do it, it would make me have a coughing attack. And since I had just had my stomach cut open, the coughing put so much pressure, and so I was able to tell them, give me a pillow so I can hold it when I cough. And they were like, oh, that's what you were saying. And I scribbled down asking them, I had probably subconsciously heard them say that my dad was coming, so I scribbled down asking when he was going to be there. And now I could tell them when I needed more painkillers, but when I was lying there, still unable to speak, my favorite verses from Psalm 40 came to my mind. It says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He also brought me up out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my steps. He has put a new song in my mouth. Praise to our God. Many will see it in fear and will trust in the Lord. And these verses have always meant a lot to me, and they comforted me in a time years ago when I was battling depression. But now laying there, it was like they were given new life. And it's funny how when you read scriptures and you're going through the Bible, you could read the same verse 20 times, and every time you read it, it's different because it depends on what's going on in your life at that time. And God, I know, put those scriptures specifically so that we can use them in certain times in our lives. And so it's always been a favorite, my favorite song. But then it was fresh and comforted me when I needed it. Well, not much later that day, I was really surprised because they were so scared about taking the ventilator out. They came in and they said, we're going to try to take the ventilator out. And I remember scribbling down saying, I'm scared. Is it going to hurt? And I was scared that they were going to take it out and I was going to stop breathing again. It all came out really fast, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, but I could feel right when it came out that breathing wasn't going to come easy. I was breathing on my own, but my oxygen levels were extremely low, and so they had to put some oxygen tubes just in my nose that were blowing so hard I felt like I was being smothered. But I thought to myself, at least the ventilator is out, and it was a victory. And the first thing I asked for was water. Everyone always says that God's timing is perfect, and I saw that so many times being in the hospital. Not long after they took my ventilator out, my brother and sister-in-law, Tim and Toby, showed up with my nieces, my brother-in-law, Jeremy, Ron and Kathy, and my dad. And I remember thanking God that they didn't have to see me with the ventilator in. And especially my nieces, and my dad had just gotten in from Virginia. And I was glad that I was able to talk to them even for a little bit, even though it was short because my throat was so raw. But just them being there meant the world to me. A couple of good friends of mine came when I was in ICU too. And I won't say names to embarrass anybody, but I remember they came in with Bible under their arm and marched in and said, "I want to read you scripture." And I said, "That's awesome." And so she just read me Psalms, and I can't tell you how just laying there hearing those scriptures just nourished my soul in a time when it really needed it. She said that God had specifically given her a verse for me the day before. She was so excited to share it. And it was so perfect with what had just happened that morning. But it was Psalm 46:5, which says, "God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her just at the break of dawn." It's so comforting to me how even scriptures that have nothing to do with us personally, they can still be used for our benefit. And it's crazy how just the night before I was fighting for my life, and now I had just gotten my ventilator out, which they said would probably be a while because they didn't want to risk anything. And Justin also had lost 50 some hours of sleep through this whole thing and had been able to sleep the night before, but he said that when he laid there, he just had peace that in the morning I would be better. And so God obviously knew what he was doing, giving her that verse. And they both prayed with me and left. But what I think is really neat is what happened after they left. And I don't think I ever even told them about this, but when they were there, I saw one of the nurses kind of hovering around my room. And I could tell she was kind of listening to what was going on and all that kind of stuff. And finally, when they left, she just came in and she grabbed my hand. And she said how encouraged she was to hear scriptures being read, to see all the people that came to pray prayers over me. And she said that she knows that at this time that I was the one that needed it. But that it encouraged her so much, and it was what she needed to hear too. My eyes watered up, and I just told her, well, then maybe it was for both of us. And I knew at that moment that everything that had happened so far was bigger than me. That there were going to be other people touched and changed through this. And I had told God, whether I live or die, that I wanted him to get the glory. and everything. And he was. I spent 3 full days in ICU. They said I was doing well enough to be moved to a recovery room, which was another huge victory. We could see God at work, even though the doctors still didn't know what really had happened. They had suspected that I had severe sepsis and that it was an infection that I had that my body was fighting against, but they didn't know what the infection was. So they were just flooding my body with general antibiotics that would just cover whatever it could be. And they told me, whenever we find out what the infection actually is, we'll be able to give you more specific antibiotics to treat that specific infection. So after being in recovery for a couple of days, they came in and said I didn't have an infection at all, and that they were stopping the antibiotics. We, at that point, were so confused. Justin did some researching online and found out that you can't have sepsis without an infection, so he, asked the doctor, how can she have sepsis if you're telling her she doesn't have an infection? And they ended up telling me that they thought what I had now was SIRS, which is Systematic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. Say that 10 times fast. But, which is the same thing as sepsis without the infection. It is completely the same, what it does to your body, and your body begins attacking itself because it thinks it has an infection to fight. They said I had every sign of sepsis and septic shock, and so they were honestly pretty surprised that they didn't find an infection. I don't have anything to back this up, but I think that my God is big enough that maybe there was an infection and he healed me before they went or figured it out, and he just said, hey, it's done. There's no infection because I took care of it. Amen. And so the nurses came in and had wanted me to start walking at least once a day. But I was so swollen, especially my legs, that walking was hard. I told him, I said, why am I so swollen? And so one of the doctors pulled out a scale, and I got on it, and it was a male nurse, but he said, does that look anywhere near normal? And I said, that's over 40 pounds, what I normally weigh, So no, it's not normal. And we ended up looking online, which is probably not a good thing to look up online. Stuff like that while you're in the hospital. But we looked up online, how much fluid weight was normal after emergency surgery, and it said about 5 to 7 pounds. So I was pretty shocked. I could not wait for the doctor to get in the next morning so I could kind of drill him on what in the world was going on. But he came in and asked how I was doing, and I just told him, is it normal for me to have gained so much fluid weight in such a short amount of time? And he said, the weight gain was because when I came in, my blood pressure was dropping so fast that they had to keep pumping bag after bag after bag of fluid to keep me alive. And so that news, I think, was even more shocking than seeing, the number on the scale. And he looked at me and he said, I don't think you fully understand what bad a shape you were in. And I think he was right. And I just couldn't fully wrap my mind around the fact that I could have died. It was almost like my mind just wouldn't let me go there. I was just so grateful to be alive, and that I'd get to go home and see my kids again. And thinking about dying wasn't an option for me. Um, there were stressful times in the hospital, from the nurses that were not so nice to doctors telling us one thing and then telling us something different and not really knowing what was going on, to, patient advocates coming in telling us you're going to have all these massive bills to pay, and, it was all very conflicting information. We didn't know what to believe, who to believe. But one night stuck out in particular when one of the nurses on call, she kept coming in, and I think she could just kind of see our frustrations. And she came in and she closed the door. And she said, "Can I pray with you guys?" And we were kind of taken off guard, but we said, "Yeah." And she said, "Okay." She said, and she bowed her head, and then she opened her eyes. She said, "Oh, is it okay to pray in the name of Jesus?" And we said, "Of course. Like, what other name would you pray to?" And she prayed for us. And it was a time where, through the stress and frustrations, we were reminded God still was in control. And I'm so grateful for that nurse who listened to God's voice, leading her to pretty much remind us of that. They were able to take my oxygen tubes out at one point, but then my oxygen levels would go too low when I was asleep, so they had to put them back in, and I had some really good days, and then some days were just really bad, and but day after day, swelling went down a little more. I was able to walk a little more, eat a little more, stay up longer, and I felt a little bit stronger. My room was very small and dark and kind of depressing. I think anybody who came could probably tell you that. But it was really brightened from just visits from friends coming and going, flowers, stuffed animals, and treats. And after being in the hospital for a week, they told me if I felt like I was strong enough that I could go home. And I was so excited because, well, it was nice to be in the hospital in case I started to get bad again. I mean, the hospital isn't necessarily the most exciting place to be. And it was hard for me to get any good sleep because they were in and out taking my vitals every few hours. And I knew being home would be the best therapy for me. I just could not believe that after a week I was feeling as good as I was. And again, it was only by the grace of God. So for a whole week I had avoided looking at my incision, and my mom was helping me to the bathroom before we left, and I just finally stopped, and I opened my gown and I looked at it. And it was hard to look at, and I cried. And I knew that every time I looked at my stomach, I was going to remember everything that happened. And I was looking at that like a bad thing. But then I started thinking maybe it wasn't such a bad thing, because I'd also remember that I almost died and I didn't. And I'd remember that God had the situation under control the entire time, that I would never have met such awesome people, and I never would have realized the amount of people that genuinely care for me, and that this scar would remind me that God helped me win the battle. This is kind of silly, but when I was younger, I used to like Xena, Warrior Princess. I don't know if you guys ever watched that, but I just figured anytime I was feeling down about myself, I could just picture myself as Xena. And I read something the other day that it was funny because I was thinking about that, and the thing I read had to do with warriors. And in the picture, it was talking to women, but I feel like it could be talking to men too. But it said, a warrior is that woman who gets up despite the enemy trying to destroy her. A woman who declares victory before seeing it. A woman who believes she will receive her miracle because she knows the Lord she serves is alive and by her side. So I thought that was so fitting for the whole situation. But when I got home, I was really amazed to see all the food that people had bought over for when I got out of the hospital so I wouldn't have to cook, and how many more people had told us, that they'd bring more meals over, just to give the word. And it was the greatest blessing because the doctor told me I shouldn't be bending or lifting, and even though I felt good, the thought of standing in the kitchen and pulling out ingredients and pots and pans and was very overwhelming for me. But my dad also got to stay an extra week to help out. My mom got to stay 2 extra weeks to help. And it was kind of a struggle for me to figure out what I was able to do and not do. Because there were days where I felt really, really good, and then there were days where I did not feel so good, and it was no rhyme or reason why that would happen. And this is kind of where it's going to get hard for me, because I feel like God wanted me to share some things that maybe aren't so easy to hear, but that and it's not me coming down on anybody or thinking I have it all together, because what I'm about to tell you is I learned, and I'm still learning. And I was thinking, well, Justin kept telling everybody I was preaching, and I kept telling him, I'm not preaching, I'm speaking. And he just kept telling me, no, you're preaching. And so I'm like, okay, so I can share my story, but Lord, I need you to help me kind of bring that preaching part into it, because I'm not a preacher, So anyway, one thing that was kind of hard to learn through all this, and I've done the same thing, is that unfortunately there are those people who pray and expect God to do the miracle, yet are almost in shock when that miracle occurs. It's been hard for me to understand that some people are really happy that I'm doing well, but don't understand that I am still having bad days. They just think, oh, she's good to go. And then there's other people that I think just want me to be bedridden and not moving. And I do believe it is all out of concern. But I'm not used to living in a small town like Big Timber. I didn't grow up in a small town. It was one of those places where you really didn't know anybody unless you found a niche, Like, my church was my niche. I developed relationships there, and those are the people I knew well. Everybody else, it's just another face going by, But Justin always tells me, this is a town where everyone knows what everyone else is going to do before they do it. And all I know is that God has most definitely performed a miracle on me. And both in the fact that I'm alive, but also in the fact of how well I'm doing since I left the hospital. Even on the bad days, even when I have bad days, I'm still doing better than I should be, honestly. And there have been offers of help that have fallen through, just because people see me out doing little things here and there, and it's not a big deal for me, but I want everyone to know that God is who touched me, who took me from a horrible situation to doing so much better than even the best hopes of my doctor had. And I could be bedridden. I could be stuck on pain pills. I could not be able to do anything. But I'm able because of what God has done for me. Not because it's in my own strength. It's what he did for me. And I'd ask for all of you to rejoice in that with me. And I'm reminded of several stories in the Bible. And I prayed this morning before I left, Lord, if there's anything you want me to say, that I didn't already write down, just give it to me. And he did. Right before I left, it was just all this stuff started flooding my head, and I wrote all this chicken scratch on the back of, but, I want him to speak through me. I don't want to be the one up here speaking. It's my voice, but I want his story and to come forth. So I'm reminded in the Bible of the man that was healed at the pool of Bethesda in John. He was sick for 38 years, and Jesus touched him. And what I think is cool is the Bible didn't say Jesus touched him and then it took him 6 weeks to get better. It said he immediately, the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. I mean, then in Mark, the woman with the discharge of blood for 12 years. And it says immediately the flow of blood stopped and she felt in her body she was healed. Completely. Not halfway, not she needed to go lay down for a month. She was healed. She went about her business as if that had never happened to her, because that's what God does. That's what he can do. So then in Mark again, Jairus' daughter, the little girl who, she died. She was dead. And Jesus said to her, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking. This was a dead girl. And there wasn't any break there. Immediately she was up and walking. So I know we know the right words to say. We know the prayers to pray. But is our faith really alive and put into action? I feel like sometimes, like I said, I'm including myself in this because I have always done this. And but we cannot put limits on God. I feel like sometimes we put him in a box and we say, Lord, heal this person. And then he does it, but then we think, well, he's healed, but it's going to take him a long time to get better. God can heal someone and the next day they could be up and moving. That's the God we serve. So sorry, because of the scribbles I got a lot of start. But I guess my point is that I cannot stand up here after all I've been through and apologize for what God has done. Because it's to his honor and his glory that I am where I am, in the shape that I'm in, and I can only thank him for that. And God is the God of changes. It's what we're talking about, it's what the series is about, but it's also how God changes us in the changes we go through. And I know that I have a greater appreciation now for the little things. Waking up in the morning, being able to walk, talk, breathe, for the relationships we have, and for people in general. These things are so important, yet we so often take them for granted. And I think I needed probably to go through this so that I could appreciate the small things, and I could put my faith into action and not put limits on what God can do. And getting this whole thing prepared was hard because it essentially forced me to relive everything again. But I'm standing here as a true testament of what prayer can do and of what God can do. And I'm standing here to tell you that prayer works, and God is still in the business of performing miracles today. It's not just Old Testament, Bible times that God performed miracles. He can do those same miracles today. And I know this because he performed one in my life. And I know that it would dishonor God to not share this story because it's not really my story, it's his story. And he deserves the praise for everything he did for me, for everything he did for my family. And if I had to go through this to be able to stand up here and tell you how good our God is, and how faithful he is, and how awesome he is, it was worth it. And through this, I learned that I have a story, and you have a story, and I have a voice, and I have a purpose in life, and I can't keep quiet about what he's done for me. And it takes me back to, I told you my favorite verses in Psalm 40, and I'll read them again for you. It says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He also brought me up out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock, and established my steps. He has put a new song in my mouth, praise to our God. Many will see it in fear and will trust in the Lord. And I'll tell you guys that God heard my cry. He heard the cries of his people to heal me. He brought me out of a very horrible pit, and he has established my steps. I have a new song in my mouth, and I can praise him for that. And my prayer is that people will see and hear and put their trust in him through this situation. Because it's not about me, it's about what God can do and what he did do. And so, I don't know what Justin had planned after this, but and I know we have, a group of people that are always ready to pray, but I would just ask if you are struggling with your faith, if you're struggling with putting limits on God, of unbelief or not believing that God can perform miracles. If you need a miracle, this altar is always open. And I would just pray and ask you all that if there's any need you have, that you just come and lay it down. And there will be people I know ready to pray for you. So thank you for letting me share my story.